The 1980s were an era of colorful Saturday mornings where cartoons ruled the airwaves. But for every smash hit, there were shows that faded into obscurity, spin-offs that tried to cash in on a name and failed spectacularly. Today, we're counting down 20 forgotten cartoon spin-offs from the 1980s that failed. You'll be shocked at what studios once thought would succeed. Gilligan's Planet, 1982. Imagine taking a goofy island sitcom and launching it into outer space. That's exactly what Hanna-Barbera did with Gilligan's Planet, a spin-off from the beloved Gilligan's Island. Instead of being stranded on a tropical shore, the castaways crash-landed on a distant planet where they encountered aliens and robots while still bumbling through familiar mishaps. It was marketed as the last Saturday morning cartoon created by Sherwood Schwartz, the original show's producer, and it premiered on CBS in 1982. But audiences weren't buying it. The humor felt stale, the characters one-dimensional, and the sci-fi setting seemed forced rather than inspired. Even children who loved cartoons were confused about why Gilligan was suddenly surrounded by extraterrestrials. Critics panned it as one of the most absurd concepts ever grafted onto an existing property. The series lasted just one season, 13 episodes in total, before vanishing into television limbo. While Gilligan's Island reruns remained popular, this animated continuation quickly became a punchline, often cited as one of the strangest missteps in the history of TV spin-offs. Culturally, the failure showed how risky it was to shoehorn a classic sitcom into the rising trend of sci-fi cartoons. Instead of rekindling nostalgia, it reminded audiences that sometimes lightning can't be bottled twice. By the mid-'80s, even devoted fans had largely forgotten it existed, and today it's remembered only as an oddball curiosity, proof that not every shipwreck needs a sequel. The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, 1980 to 82. By 1980, Happy Days was already a cultural touchstone thanks to the leather-jacketed cool of Arthur the Fonz Fonzarelli. So ABC attempted to stretch the brand with an animated spin-off. But instead of focusing on Fonzie's legendary swagger, the Fonz and the Happy Days Gang became a bizarre time-traveling adventure. With Richie, Ralph Malph, and a futuristic girl named Cupcake, Fonzie tried to fix history while accompanied by a talking dog named Mr. Cool. It sounded like a recipe for youth-friendly fun, but the execution missed the mark. Rather than amplifying Fonzie's cool factor, it stripped him down into a cartoon caricature complete with corny jokes and recycled plots. The addition of a dog and Cupcake felt like desperate attempts to chase Saturday morning trends rather than honoring the original sitcom. The show's failure was swift. Critics mocked it as proof that not every sitcom character could translate into animation. Parents noted the lack of heart that made Happy Days so beloved, and kids weren't impressed with the clumsy storylines. Despite Henry Winkler providing Fonzie's voice, it couldn't hold attention, running for only 2 short seasons before fading from the schedule. From a cultural standpoint, it's an example of networks trying to squeeze too much out of a hit. Rather than letting Fonzie remain a television legend, they diluted him in a spin-off that few remember. Today, it's a relic of how far producers were willing to stretch credibility in the name of cartoon tie-ins, and why sometimes less really is more. Laverne and Shirley in the Army, 1981 to 82. If Happy Days could spawn a failed cartoon, why not Laverne and Shirley? Hanna-Barbera thought so too, adapting the popular sitcom into a slapstick military cartoon. In this version, Laverne and Shirley enlist in the Army, accompanied by a talking pig named Sergeant Squealy, who constantly got them into trouble. Voiced by Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall, the show aired on ABC in 1981. But audiences were baffled. The witty, chemistry-driven comedy that made Laverne and Shirley a smash hit on primetime was reduced to generic pratfalls and funny animal gags. The presence of Squealy the pig in particular drew ridicule. It felt like executives had decided that simply adding a talking animal was enough to sell the show to kids. Unfortunately, children weren't impressed, and adult fans of the original sitcom had no interest in this bizarre reinterpretation. Ratings quickly tanked, and the show lasted only one season, later being paired with M.A.S.K and Mindy Laverne and Shirley Fonz, an awkward bundle of other struggling spin-offs. Culturally, this cartoon stands as a reminder of how often the 1980s repackaged sitcoms for younger audiences, with little success. Rather than honoring its roots, it turned beloved characters into flat caricatures, damaging their legacy in the process. Today, it's rarely mentioned except as an example of Hanna-Barbera's tendency to overproduce spin-offs that no one really asked for. The Dukes, 1983. The Dukes of Hazzard was one of the most popular live-action shows on television in the early 1980s, so naturally, CBS tried to spin it off into animation. Simply called The Dukes, the cartoon followed Bo, Luke, Daisy, and even Uncle Jesse as they raced cars around the globe in competitions against the scheming Boss Hogg and Sheriff Roscoe. A pet raccoon named Smokey was added for comic relief. Unlike the live-action version, which thrived on stunts, humor, and country charm, the animated version lacked energy. The plots were repetitive, endless races, endless schemes, endless wins by the Duke boys. Children lost interest quickly, and adults found it uninspired. Complicating matters further, the series launched just as Tom Wopat and John Schneider were temporarily replaced in the live-action show due to contract disputes. This weakened audience attachment even more, as voices didn't always match expectations. Despite 2 short seasons, the show is largely forgotten today, overshadowed by the enduring fame of the live-action series. It's a reminder that copying a formula into a different medium doesn't guarantee success. From a cultural perspective, the Dukes exemplified how networks tried to milk every successful franchise, even if it meant creating a hollow imitation. In the long run, its failure reinforced the idea that nostalgia-driven spin-offs needed more than flashy branding. They needed heart, which this cartoon simply didn't have. The Little Rascals, 1982-83. The antics of our gang had been part of American pop culture since the 1930s, so Hanna-Barbera attempted to revive them for Saturday morning television in 1982. The Little Rascals cartoon brought back Spanky, Alfalfa, Darla, and the gang in brightly colored sanitized adventures. At first, the idea seemed solid. Generations of fans still remembered the live-action shorts, and the characters were iconic. But the translation to animation fell flat. The charm of the original came from the kids' natural humor and quirky personalities, which the cartoon struggled to capture. Instead, it leaned on formulaic storytelling, stripping away the unpredictable spark that made the Rascals beloved. Adding to its troubles, the show faced lawsuits from the heirs of original cast members, who argued their likenesses were being used without proper authorization. This legal controversy forced the show off the airwaves, making reruns rare and further burying it in obscurity. Culturally, the Little Rascals cartoon highlighted how nostalgia could backfire when mishandled. Rather than reviving the franchise, it showed how difficult it was to replicate lightning in a bottle. Today, the animated series is nearly forgotten, overshadowed by the enduring popularity of the original black and white shorts. ALF, the animated series, /ALF Tales, 1987-89. When ALF the sitcom became a hit in the late 80s, NBC wasted no time trying to milk its popularity. The result was not one, but 2 animated spin-offs. ALF, the animated series, and ALF Tales. The first followed Gordon Shumway, ALF's real name, back on his home planet Melmac, before Earth and the Tanner family ever came into the picture. The second reimagined ALF and friends retelling fairy tales with a Melmac twist. The problem? Neither cartoon captured what audiences loved about the original. The sitcom thrived on ALF's witty banter, culture clash, and absurd interactions with humans. The animated shows removed that dynamic entirely. Without the Tanner family, ALF's snarky humor was lost, replaced by clunky plots, loud slapstick, and strange Melmac world-building that felt more annoying than entertaining. Kids tuned in initially thanks to the name recognition, but ratings dropped fast. By 1989, both cartoons were canceled, leaving the once-beloved Alien stranded in syndication limbo. Today, even die-hard ALF fans struggle to remember the animated spin-offs, and when they do, it's often with a wince. Culturally, the attempt to expand ALF showed how studios sometimes mistook popularity for permanence. Executives believed the character alone could carry multiple shows, but audiences reminded them that context and chemistry mattered. In hindsight, the animated series stand as cautionary tales of overexposure, demonstrating how quickly a cultural phenomenon can collapse when stretched too thin. Fraggle Rock, the animated series, 1987 to 88. Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock was a global hit, beloved for its imaginative puppetry, heartwarming messages, and catchy songs. But when NBC attempted an animated spin-off in 1987, the magic simply didn't translate. The puppets, with their texture and soul, were replaced with flat 2D drawings that lacked charm. The animated Fraggle Rock followed the same familiar characters, Gobo, Moki, Wembley, Boober, and Red, as they embarked on adventures in their colorful underground world. But without Henson's puppetry, the Fraggles lost their spark. The cartoon's simplified humor and awkward pacing failed to capture the warmth and layered storytelling of the original. Viewers noticed immediately. Ratings were poor, and the show was canceled after just one season. Unlike other 80s cartoons that enjoyed reruns or VHS releases, the animated Fraggle Rock vanished almost entirely, overshadowed by its vastly superior parent series. Culturally, its failure reinforced the idea that not every franchise could be repackaged for Saturday mornings. The original Fraggle Rock thrived on artistry and innovation, but the animated version was generic, lacking the very heart that made Henson's creation resonate. Today, it's a forgotten misstep, remembered only as proof that some magic simply can't be animated. Mad Balls, 1987. Gross-out toys were everywhere in the 80s, and Mad Balls, rubber balls with grotesque faces and punny names like Slobulus and Oculus Orbis, became a fad. Inevitably, they got their own cartoon special in 1987. Mad Balls, Escape from Orb. And Mad Balls. Gross jokes attempted to stretch the toy line into a TV franchise. The results were disastrous. The animation was clunky, the humor juvenile, and the characters one-note. Worse still, parents complained about the grotesque imagery and crude tone. Many broadcasters hesitated to re-air it, fearing backlash over whether the cartoon was too ugly for children. Culturally, it became a case study in how toy companies sometimes pushed merchandise too hard. Unlike Transformers or He-Man, which paired toys with rich storylines, Mad Balls had little narrative to build on. The fad fizzled almost as quickly as it began. Today, collectors remember the toys, but the cartoon spin-off is largely erased from memory, a failed attempt to squeeze lasting entertainment out of playground novelties. Inhumanoids, 1986. On paper, Inhumanoids seemed like a bold experiment. Produced by Sunbow, the same studio behind G.I. Joe and Transformers, it told the story of EarthCore, a team of scientists battling terrifying underground monsters like Tendril, Metlar, and Decompose. Unlike most Saturday morning cartoons, Inhumanoids was shockingly dark, complete with grotesque creatures, horror imagery, and nightmare fuel moments. Unfortunately, this very darkness sealed its fate. Parents complained the show was too frightening for children, with monsters that looked ripped from a horror film. Stations faced pressure, and censorship debates followed. Some markets pulled episodes, while others relegated it to awkward time slots. Although it had toy tie-ins, Inhumanoids couldn't sustain momentum. Its grim tone clashed with the bright, toy-driven spirit of the 80s cartoon landscape. After just one season, it disappeared. Culturally, Inhumanoids remains a cult curiosity, admired by fans who see it as ahead of its time. But mainstream audiences barely remember it, and its failure reinforced network caution about pushing boundaries in children's programming. COPS, 1988. Set in the far-off year of 2020, COPS imagined a futuristic police force led by Baldwin P. Bulletproof vests as they fought high-tech crime bosses. Produced by Hasbro, the cartoon was designed to sell action figures, much like G.I. Joe. Each episode followed the slogan, "It's crime-fighting time." But despite flashy tech and colorful characters, COPS never took off. The problem wasn't just competition, it was also tone. The show leaned heavily into futuristic weapons and exaggerated villains, but lacked the emotional weight or world-building of other toy-based cartoons. Parents raised concerns about the violence, leading to tighter restrictions on its time slots. The toy line flopped as well, killing the franchise. By the early 90s, COPS was gone, remembered only by a handful of collectors and cartoon historians. Culturally, its failure highlighted the limits of the toy-to-cartoon pipeline. Without a strong narrative hook, even futuristic gimmicks couldn't save it. Today, COPS lives on as an odd footnote, a forgotten experiment in a crowded Saturday morning lineup. Laser Tag Academy, 1986. In the mid-1980s, laser tag arenas were exploding in popularity, and toy companies rushed to capitalize on the craze. Enter Laser Tag Academy, a Saturday morning cartoon designed to promote the LJN toy line. The series followed Jamie Jaron, a teenage hero from the year 3010 who traveled back in time to protect her ancestors while battling the villainous Draxandreer. With glowing weapons and high-tech armor, it seemed perfectly tailored for kids obsessed with futuristic gadgets. But the cartoon was a classic case of style over substance. The storylines were repetitive, often revolving around flashy battles with little character depth. While the live-action laser tag experience was exhilarating, watching animated laser beams week after week quickly grew stale. Even children who loved the toys found themselves losing interest in the cartoon's formulaic plots. The series also faced criticism from parents concerned about its heavy focus on laser guns and combat, echoing wider debates about violent imagery in children's programming. Some stations relegated it to poor time slots, and without consistent support, Laser Tag Academy fizzled out after a single season of 13 episodes. Culturally, its failure underscored the risk of building a show entirely around a fleeting fad. Unlike franchises such as Transformers, which balanced toys with strong storytelling, Laser Tag Academy was purely a marketing vehicle. Today, it's remembered only by nostalgic fans of the toy craze, a forgotten reminder that no amount of neon beams could disguise weak storytelling. Kid Video, 1984 to 85. Few cartoons captured the MTV generation vibe like Kid Video. Produced by D.I.C. and aired on NBC, it followed a real-life band transported into an animated world called The Flip Side, where they battled the sinister Master Blaster. The mix of live-action segments, animated adventures, and licensed pop music felt innovative at the time, directly appealing to music-obsessed teens. At first glance, it looked like a fresh, modern twist on Saturday mornings. The characters resembled pop idols, episodes featured music videos, and the cartoon leaned heavily on the aesthetics of the early MTV era. But beneath the flashy packaging, the writing was shallow. Episodes relied on cliches, with villains and story arcs that lacked depth or stakes. While the integration of pop songs was initially exciting, licensing costs became a headache for reruns, limiting its syndication lifespan. Without music rights, the series lost its defining feature, dooming it to obscurity. Ratings dropped, and NBC pulled the plug after just 2 seasons. Culturally, Kid Video is fascinating as an experiment that attempted to blend music television with Saturday morning cartoons. It foreshadowed later multimedia approaches, but its execution couldn't sustain momentum. Today, it exists as a cult memory for fans of 80s pop culture, a bold but forgotten attempt to fuse cartoons with the music video craze. M.A.S.K, 1985 to 86. Short for Mobile Armored Strike Command, M.A.S.K was Hasbro's answer to Transformers and G.I. Joe. The series followed Matt Tracker and his team as they used transforming vehicles to battle the criminal organization Venom. Each episode featured high-speed chases, gadget-packed helmets, and dramatic one-liners. Initially, M.A.S.K seemed poised for greatness. The toy line was impressive, with vehicles that converted into combat machines. The animation was slick, and kids loved the idea of ordinary cars doubling as weapons of war. But while the formula was flashy, the storytelling never quite lived up to its rivals. Plots felt thin, characters were underdeveloped, and episodes relied too heavily on toy gimmicks instead of meaningful narratives. The series' decline came swiftly. After its first season of 65 episodes, the second season shifted focus to racing storylines, diluting the action-adventure appeal. Viewers drifted away, and the toy sales began to slump. By 1986, M.A.S.K had lost momentum and was quietly canceled. Culturally, it became a reminder that even toy-driven cartoons needed more than flashy transformations to endure. While fans today still admire the toys, the cartoon itself is largely forgotten, a casualty of the overcrowded Saturday morning battlefield. Its failure highlights the brutal competition of the 1980s, where only the strongest concepts survived. Blackstar, 1981. Before He-Man and the Masters of the Universe took over toy aisles, there was Blackstar. Produced by Filmation in 1981, this fantasy series followed astronaut John Blackstar, who crash-landed on the planet Sagar and became a sword-wielding hero battling the evil overlord. It had all the ingredients of a hit: muscular heroes, magical swords, colorful sidekicks, but it arrived just a little too early. The animation style and character designs clearly foreshadowed He-Man. In fact, many fans see Blackstar as a prototype for that franchise. But while He-Man would explode into a cultural juggernaut, Blackstar never quite found its audience. The show ran for just 13 episodes, failing to secure the toy line or marketing push that might have kept it alive. The problem was timing. In 1981, the market wasn't yet primed for fantasy-based toy cartoon synergy. By the time He-Man debuted in 1983, the formula had been perfected, leaving Blackstar in the shadows. Culturally, Blackstar is fascinating as a what could have been. Had it launched 2 years later, it might have shared in the success of its successor. Instead, it became an overlooked footnote, remembered mainly by hardcore animation historians. Today, it's a reminder that in television, timing is everything, and arriving too early can be just as fatal as being too late. The Get-Along Gang, 1984 to 85. Based on greeting card illustrations from American Greetings, the Get-Along Gang was an attempt to turn a cute concept into a full-blown franchise. The show featured a group of anthropomorphic animal children, Montgomery Moose, Dottie Dog, and their friends, who preached teamwork and problem-solving while hanging out in their clubhouse caboose. Though the pilot movie in 1984 gained attention, the series that followed in 1985 quickly fell flat. The characters were charming on paper, but lacked personality in execution. Episodes leaned too heavily on moral lessons, leaving plots predictable and devoid of excitement. Kids who expected adventure or humor often tuned out halfway through. Merchandise was produced, including toys, books, and lunchboxes, but sales lagged compared to giants like Care Bears or Rainbow Bright. With just 13 episodes aired, the Get-Along Gang disappeared from schedules almost as quickly as it arrived. Culturally, it highlighted the pitfalls of forcing a franchise without organic appeal. While some children fondly recall the characters, most forgot the show within a few years. Today, it remains an obscure relic of the 1980s, a reminder that even in an era of endless cartoons, not every group of cuddly critters could capture hearts. The Brown Hornet, 1980 to 82. Spinning out of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, the Brown Hornet was a cartoon within a cartoon, a superhero parody that became so popular among Fat Albert viewers that it was eventually given its own segments. The premise followed the titular Brown Hornet and his sidekicks, Stinger, and Tweeterbell as they fought evil across the galaxy while teaching moral lessons. While it had a quirky charm, the Brown Hornet struggled outside the safety net of Fat Albert. The animation was stiff and the stories were painfully predictable, often hammering home morals at the expense of entertainment. Kids who enjoyed the action-packed promise of a spacefaring superhero were left disappointed by the tame adventures. Another issue was identity. The show never quite knew whether it was parody, serious sci-fi, or purely educational. This tonal confusion meant it failed to stand on its own, even though it had a built-in audience from Fat Albert. When the parent show began to lose steam in the early 80s, the Brown Hornet faded with it, leaving little legacy behind. Culturally, it represented the era's push to mix education with entertainment, a noble idea, but one that often resulted in bland storytelling. Today, the Brown Hornet is mostly remembered by nostalgia buffs, a forgotten spin-off that proved even popular shows couldn't always launch successful satellites. Number 4. The Comic Strip, 1987. In 1987, Rankin-Bass Productions, famous for Thundercats, experimented with an anthology cartoon called The Comic Strip. The show was divided into 4 segments: Tiger Sharks, Mini Monsters, Street Frogs, and Karate Cat. Each had its own distinct style, characters, and tone, ranging from superhero parody to musical street animals. On paper, it was a bold idea, a cartoon magazine offering variety each week. But in practice, it spread itself too thin. None of the segments had enough time to develop compelling characters or stories. Of the bunch, Tiger Sharks showed the most promise as an underwater adventure in the vein of Thundercats, but it never reached the same popularity. Viewers were confused by the rotating formats, and the lack of a clear flagship segment meant kids had little incentive to return week after week. Ratings sank and the show ended after just 1 season. Culturally, the comic strip is interesting as a failed experiment in format. While anthology cartoons had potential, audiences in the 80s craved consistency and strong branding. Without a recognizable hero or toy line to anchor it, the show disappeared quickly. Today, it's a footnote in animation history, remembered mainly by fans of obscure 80s cartoons hunting for lost gems. The Super Globetrotters, 1979-80, syndicated into the 80s. The Harlem Globetrotters were already cultural icons, so Hanna-Barbera tried to give them a superhero twist. The Super Globetrotters transformed the basketball stars into caped crusaders with bizarre powers. One could flatten into a sphere, another could create duplicates, and yet another could turn into water. Together, they fought villains while still squeezing in slapstick basketball antics. While the original Harlem Globetrotters cartoon of the 1970s was charming, the Super Globetrotters felt over the top and gimmicky. Critics noted that the characters were reduced to caricatures with stories that leaned too heavily on absurd powers rather than clever comedy. The series aired briefly in 1979-80, but was rerun into the early 80s. By then, audiences had moved on, and the superhero craze was already being dominated by better-executed shows. With no merchandise tie-in and weak scripts, it quickly disappeared from rotation. Culturally, it was another example of Hanna-Barbera overextending a concept. While the Globetrotters remain legends, their animated superhero alter egos have been largely erased from memory. Today, the Super Globetrotters is mostly recalled as one of those "did that really exist?" shows, a strange relic of when studios tried to turn anything popular into a cartoon. Slimer and The Real Ghostbusters, 1988-91. After The Real Ghostbusters proved a hit in 1986, producers decided to give Slimer, everyone's favorite green ghost, a spotlight of his own. The result was Slimer. And The Real Ghostbusters, which expanded the series into a full hour, with one half focusing on Ghostbusters' adventures and the other on Slimer's comedic misadventures. Unfortunately, the balance didn't work. Fans who tuned in for spooky Ghostbusters action were frustrated by Slimer's juvenile, slapstick-heavy shorts. The ghost that had been funny as comic relief suddenly felt overexposed. Kids grew tired of his antics, and older viewers abandoned the show altogether. The rebranded series also suffered from production fatigue. Animation quality dipped, storylines became weaker, and ratings steadily declined. By 1991, the franchise's animated era came to a quiet close. Culturally, this spin-off revealed the danger of overestimating a side character's appeal. Slimer was iconic as part of an ensemble, but he couldn't carry his own show. Today, the Slimer era of Ghostbusters is remembered as the beginning of the franchise's decline in Saturday morning television, a failed attempt to stretch Slime into lane. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.